Hello and welcome to the Consistency Project with EC Sinkowski. My name is Patrick Cummings, and every episode I have the privilege of having a discussion with EC on subject matters that range from nutrition to fitness to the choices we can all make to live a healthier, more functional life. By exploring both the principles at play and the actions worth carrying out as a result, it's our goal to get you thinking, get you moving, and get you taking more consistent steps toward optimizing your well-being. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Hello, and how are you, EC?
Wonderful. How are you doing?
Wonderful and wondrous. We're going to return to our Quick Bites format this week. Quick Bites is when you go through the long laundry list of questions that listeners and folks on Instagram have sent you, nutrition questions, fitness questions, all sorts of questions, personal finance questions. You get lots of things, I'm sure. And we try to dive into 5 questions in about 5 minutes each. And these questions are always really good questions, but often aren't quite worthy of a full 20 to 30 minute episode. And so we've got 5 questions on what we're just loosely calling fitness nutrition, which I assume is like nutrition questions for folks who are interested in improving their fitness. Is that like a good encapsulation of what these are?
Yeah, I think we started with the last Quick Bites of me trying to collapse them in just a theme.
Yep.
And so this was then exactly that. Like, okay, these are questions that have to do with how to improve a fitness outcome, but the nutrition aspect, of course. All
right. So again, we've got 5 questions, 5 minutes each. Before we dive into the first one, as I always like to ask you, what's the best way to get a question into one of these future Quick Bite episodes, or perhaps a full episode if we get a question that warrants it?
Yeah, some of them do become full episodes. So just click reply on any email I send out to my main newsletter list. So that's optimizemenutrition.com/email. I'm accepting less and less off of social media just because it's really hard to keep track of the volume. And so if you're on my email list, that's how you get it in the queue. And also I am answering some questions just on the weekly emails I send out so I can get through the questions faster. So that's the place to be.
All right. Good. First question, or really a question from 2 different people that we're jamming together. This is from Tom and Amanda. They're asking about fueling for CrossFit competitions. And the questions generally were, how should the fueling or macro change on competition day? And how should an athlete's eating, fueling, macros change in the week leading up to the competition? Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. So really the best way to figure out competition fueling is just to practice it, particularly the more that you want to be competitive at these events, because there's really no formulas or strategies that I can just sort of say generally, because there's too much variability in the actual event, especially because we're talking about something like CrossFit here. But there's also just the variability in needs and preferences. And so I think one of the more underappreciated aspects of experience in sport or competition is getting the reps under your belt of what to do in competition from all aspects. Not, of course, just like how fast can I run, but what does my hydration look like? What does my fueling look like? What does my recovery look like? And on and on. And so that you have all of those pieces in place so that you can really display how fast your running time is or how much training you've done. And not to have some hiccup in the competition moment be because of fueling, and that's the reason you didn't get to display all your training. So if you really want to know, how do I need to fuel for a 1-day competition of CrossFit with, 3 or 4 events, you're going to have to run a mock event. Maybe it's 2 or 3 weeks out, and you're going to try a nutrition fueling strategy. You're going to see how it goes and then decide if you want to keep that or make changes. And maybe at this mock event, you don't do 100% intensity, but you have to go hard enough to know what the workout feels like and also really what volume and types of food that you can stomach. This is a little easier to do when you're an athlete who has the same event. Maybe you're, a 2K rower. Obviously, you kind of have a lot more knowledge about what the event is. It's a little bit harder with CrossFit workouts, but you probably have some knowledge about what types of events they could be to kind of be able to do this. The other thought, besides running a mock event 2 or 3 weeks out, is if you're not that worried about being super competitive, especially at your first one, you just go in without a strategy and let your first competition be your mock event. Obviously have some common sense, eat when you're hungry, bring some food that you like, but then it's sort of your mock event and you learn from it and you just take that one into your next kind of local competition, right? It's not a waste of time per se, because you're learning the experience of competing. But here are some a little bit more specifics that I would encourage people to think about. For local competitions, local CrossFit competitions, and I haven't been to one in some time, but simply due to the time and logistics of these local events, the workouts tend to be shorter, right? I mean, maybe we have 50 or more athletes that they've got to get through. They've got one small box gym, multiple events in a day. These events can't be 1 hour each, right? Like there's just no way that they're going to get through everybody. So a lot of time we've got these short workouts. And so the first question is the total volume of the day that much more than your usual workout volume? And I would guess in many cases it's not. I mean, it may be. Maybe they have some long run and maybe they have some other long workout, but a lot of times it's kind of this sub 10 minute due to logistics. And so why people are so tired after these competitions is not necessarily this lack of fuel. It's just the intensity, it's the adrenaline, it's the nervous system, it's being in competition that you might not need quite as much fuel, especially for these one-day events, as you might think. Again, based on the volume. While CrossFit is intense, the volume doesn't necessarily use up all the fuel you have in hand. So just think about that you might not need thousands of extra calories. Maybe you bring a couple extra sandwiches or a few extra bananas, maybe an energy drink or something like that, and just sort of see how it goes. Amanda had mentioned in her question, which I kind of cut out because to keep it more general for the both of them, she had mentioned she had seen people at these competitions kind of either using like Sour Patch Kids or gummy bears as kind of the quick energy. Sure, fine enough if that's what people want to use for some carbs during the competition. But this is a great example of why you want to run a mock event. Like you might not feel so great after a handful of gummy bears if you don't eat them.
Yep.
Actually, as an aside, I encourage you to go read the reviews of gummy bears on Amazon. If you want to understand how it might not be a great idea. But this is why you have to kind of test things out ahead of time, because sometimes just the GI response to different foods, even though they might sound like a fun idea, aren't always what you want to do, especially in a competition. So kind of think about maybe the meals that you typically eat before a workout just during the week, and maybe you just bring kind of replicates of that to use during your first competition or one of the initial ones. So yeah, that's something to think about. Do you really need a lot of extra calories? Maybe you just double up on a typical lunch that you have, and that's going to be your fueling strategy for these one-day events. And then, beyond that, it's just pretty hard. How long are the events? Is it a multi-day event? How many events in a day? It's just too hard to give too many more recommendations beyond that. So let me then just touch on that second part of the question, like what would I do on the week leading up or tapering week? I would keep the diet pretty much the same for the same reasons. I think a lot of these competitions don't have that much volume. Maybe you do a little bit of carb loading. So maybe we're talking about 100 to 200 extra grams of carbs per day, about 5 days out. This is to kind of top up muscle glycogen, so you have all those fuel stores ready to go. Is this absolutely necessary? Probably not. But also that caloric increase for 5 days isn't going to really change your weight significantly, so I'm not worried about that. You are going to need that strategy and a more aggressive strategy if we're looking for something for multi-day events or something like the CrossFit Games, something like a marathon. We're going to look at like 3 to 5 grams of carbs per pound per day. But again, we have to look at the overall volume of the event to really necessitate that level of extra fueling.
Got it. Okay. Next question is from Leah. She says, can you talk about the supplement UCAN Super Starch, supposedly with long-lasting energy? It's promoted on various podcasts and apparently used by CrossFitters.
Yeah. So I think UCAN is the overall supplement brand, and I think the Super Starch product she's talking about is specifically called Live Steady, and it's marketed as this like low glycemic complex carbohydrate that will supposedly give you the sustained energy. And from their website, quote, say goodbye to spikes and crashes, end quote. And so, yeah, the website talks a lot about the stable blood sugar idea. And so right off the bat, we sort of talked about that before, about blood sugar spikes and crashes, where really it's okay if your blood sugar isn't perfectly static at the same value every moment of every day. Your pancreas releases insulin to lower blood sugar, to help you store carbs when it goes up or when you take in food. And then you also release glucagon to release glucose from the storage spots if you're using up blood sugar. if it's getting too low. So we should be confident that like our pancreas and our liver, where some of this glucose is stored, is what's keeping our blood sugar stable within normal ranges for any like otherwise healthy individual, that we don't need to worry about this kind of minute to minute food choices of this idea for like perfect static sustained energy. Now this supplement specifically, it's a hydrothermally modified waxy maize starch. So basically they do some chemical alteration to a starch. And the point of it was to have this, again, sustained energy where there's just like a slow release of glucose to the bloodstream, and supposedly will also help you promote fat utilization because you don't have all of these carbs coming to the system. You're going to have a nice slow release of carbs, supposedly, and will also allow your body to use fat simultaneously. From what I understand, it was actually developed as a solution for people who have glycogen storage disease. This is a rare metabolic disorder where individuals are not able to store or break down glycogen, which is how our bodies store glucose. And this is a obviously really problematic disease. I actually know somebody who's affected by it. Until more recent treatment, they actually had to regularly consume corn syrup throughout the day because that was their steady supply of actually having glucose to provide energy for just basic life functions. So, because in glycogen storage disease, the body doesn't have this storage capacity, this chemically modified starch, which has this slow release, is actually a quite, potentially ingenious solution, because now this thing sits in the digestive tract for a longer period of time. And so instead of maybe downing cornstarch, they have this nice slow release from something that kind of inhibits digestion. So really cool from like a medical condition point of view, but it always makes me pause when we try to take these, hey, this might help out a medical condition, and we try to bring that into the realm of the otherwise healthy individuals. It's much like continuous glucose monitors that we've talked about, great for insulin-dependent diabetics, irrelevant to otherwise healthy individuals. So really same thing here. And so, yeah, it's like cool to go through the science and understand what it's trying to do. But the real question we have to ask ourselves is, okay, so does it actually help with performance? Like I get the science, sustained energy, whatever. Do we actually see that it helps performance? And the answer is no. So there's a Bauer paper in the show notes titled, quote, slow absorbing modified starch before and during prolonged cycling increases fat oxidation and gastrointestinal distress without changing performance, end quote. So they were looking at this product, and, it's really tempting when you hear that title to hear like, well, oh my gosh, it increases fat oxidation. That must be a good thing. First of all, that just tells us that there's more fat burning, not fat loss. But what you really needed to hear about that title was it increases GI distress without changing performance. Not good, not good. GI distress, performance stays the same. So that's ultimately what we would not want from a performance substance or supplement. The author had another paper in 2021. This was a critical review of kind of recent innovations in carb supplementation. And he says that these types of modified starches have, quote, limited utility for endurance athletes. Performance is unchanged or impaired in practically relevant scenarios. These include short to moderate duration, which is 30 to 90 minutes exercise, or with prolonged greater than 90 minutes exercise, end quote. So nice idea, doesn't really seem to be helping and arguably impairing performance. And so I would not worry about using this product, and instead just look at the total quantity of carbohydrates I'm eating from, let's say, potatoes, bananas, rice, you name it. Make sure that's the right amount, and that's going to be your best energy supply for performance.
Got it. Next one is from Kristen. She says, I've never heard of urolithin A supplementation before and was intrigued by the study from May 2022. Clinical study shows postbiotic urolithin A improves muscle strength and exercise performance in middle-aged athletes. I think that was the title of the study, I imagine. She asked, is it worth it?
Yeah, I think that was the title of like this news release of it. Okay. And Kristen, thank you for hanging in there. This question was submitted some time ago when that first came out. So I am getting to this question finally. So urolithin A, what is it? It's this byproduct of when the microbes, which in our gut, mostly our colon, they break down specific phytochemicals. Now, what the heck is the phytochemicals? Phytochemicals are these groups of thousands and thousands of molecules that give fruits and vegetables their bright colors. We've probably heard of things like lutein in spinach that supposedly helps with, macular degeneration of the eye, resveratrol in grapes. We've heard about that for cardiovascular health. So when microbes in your gut break down certain types of these phytochemical compounds, urolithin A is produced. And so that's why it's called a postbiotic, meaning it's resulting from the microbial activity of the gut. And basically in this study, a group of adults were given the supplement for 4 months, and they did find that strength significantly improved. Aerobic performance did not. And I also saw a later study from 2022 that sort of had that mixed bag of responses in terms of like strength versus aerobic, or however they were looking at exercise. The first thing I want to note, it doesn't totally negate the results of the studies I just mentioned, but both studies have authors that work for the company that produced the supplement. One of the studies was funded by the company, and some of the authors also hold patents for the supplement. Now, again, that doesn't negate the result. Doesn't mean everybody who is selling a product is doing it just for their own financial gain, but it does always make you pause, and you'd really kind of want to see the results be replicated by an independent group. But of course, then we run into proprietary research, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, we'd love to see this replicated by somebody else. So that makes me pause. But I think the bigger question is, okay, let's just take it at those results were achieved and it was a fair, valid study, blah, blah, blah. Is this the best solution we have? That is where I'm like, I don't think so. So from what I saw in the original study, these individuals took the supplements for 4 months and they measured their exercise performance at the beginning and end. And one of this was the significant improvements in muscle strength. And they were looking at non-trained overweight adults aged 40 to 64. So let's just say for fun that these untrained adults had a leg press of 100 pounds on day one. Okay, so this is saying at the end of 4 months, by taking this supplement and not working out, their strength improved to 112 pounds. That's on the leg press. That's not that great. If I was going to take some untrained adults and do the leg press, I would hope to see 30% increase, if not more, with, a 4-month routine. Let alone the fact that exercise besides a supplement would have things like lean mass improvements, which then could affect their weight in a positive way. Maybe depending on the exercise we choose, maybe it's not the leg press, maybe we do squats, we get some coordination in there. Maybe we're doing it in a group environment, we get something like socialization in there. So there's lots of other things that we have to remember exercise could be bringing to the table besides just this increase in strength. And when we look at the increase in strength in the supplement, it's not that great compared to exercise. So I just don't think it's really worth it. First, is this study really unbiased? Not sure. Would love to see it repeated. And then, is this actually the best solution we have? Like, why don't we just do some strength training instead, in my opinion?
Let me ask you something about the third-party testing idea. I don't think we've ever talked about this, but like if I were to have a patent on a supplement, and I say that, this is mine and I own the IP on it, could third-party companies, whatever, say, cool, I'm going to go test that and I'm going to report my own findings? Or is there something in the kind of ownership of it that would limit other people being able to replicate whatever studies that company happens to say they've done? Are there any limitations there, or is it just like they can't sell it, but they can test it till the sky is, till the cows come home?
I think a lot of it is depending on what the supplement blend is, or what was the dosage used, or what was the concentration of it. And sometimes that's not released in the study. They're just going to say it's a proprietary blend. And so then somebody else could have the substance, but what dosage did they use? And so you can't always compare them on a direct. That's oftentimes kind of the limiting factor. They don't really share all the details for another group to replicate it.
Got it. Okay. Fourth question we've got is from Kat. She says, I'm 5'2", 110 pounds, very active and muscular. Calorie suggestions for me are around 1,350 per day for basic life, but I consume on average 2,200 calories a day. I run approximately 40 miles a week spread across 5 to 6 days for deliberate exercise and average, not including running, 15,000 steps a day. I notice that on my off days, I am still just as hungry as I am on exercise days, and sometimes I feel like I'm more hungry, and I would say that I usually still eat the same amount, again on average. Sometimes, in fact, I tend to be more prone to overeating and find I am more likely to eat lower quality foods. When I talk with my friends who are also quite active, they report similar feelings. I'm wondering if you can offer any insight into this phenomenon and how one should adapt or change their diet on days off, or if it's necessary to do so in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah. So some of the problems with these questions is that unfortunately we don't have a little bit of a dialogue for me to get a little more precise about kind of what they describe here. So, Kat did give us some general numbers, and just the way it's phrased, I'm just not sure if she's 100% tracking everything every single day. She kind of talks about stuff on average. And so maybe she's done it some days on, some days off, taking a peek at certain times. I'm just not really sure. Now, to be clear, I think I've said this before, but I don't think it's imperative that everybody does track everything all of the time. Maybe she's not necessarily looking for a change in weight or performance. Maybe she's just asking this purely from a hunger point of view. So maybe she doesn't need to track everything. Fine enough. That's not a problem per se, but it's just really hard to give advice on specific food amounts if you aren't tracking to know, because I can't tell you how many times my clients have learned that their perception about how much they think they're eating is not actually the amount that they are eating. So that's one thing. The other thing is, I'm not nitpicking here. It's just very common. How did she settle on that 2,200 calories is what her intake is, assuming that is, accurate to what it is? Because I often have active individuals, with which Kat quite is, how shocked at how many calories they can eat. And so I think there is the chance here that her baseline just needs to be higher and really could prevent. So
even though she says like 1,300 is what somebody would tell me to do, I'm doing way more than that 20. It might be actually that 2,500 might be the real answer. Okay.
Yeah, for sure. And that could also be preventing then some swings in intake if she just has a higher baseline, right? Because maybe 2,200 is actually a deficit for her. She might be underfueling, and just the overeating days actually end up balancing her out.
Got it.
So those are some of the things I kind of want to hem and haw with her to give it before I went into an answer. But let's, for the purposes of a quick bites, assume that 2,200 is the right number. She is weighing and measuring everything, so we know that that's consistent every day. The question then, I think, is, should I change my calories for rest days, and why am I more hungry on some days than others? So kind of that first point, should I change my calories on rest days? I'm a pretty big, no surprise here, supporter of consistency. And this even is in numbers per day, right? Like, I am not really into changing the numbers based on activity. Why? First of all, it just keeps it easy. But second, the body doesn't operate in these like perfect 24-hour cycles like our mind does, right? So the effect of a workout can really spill into the next day in terms of an elevated metabolism, especially the more intensity it has. And strength training even can have an elevated metabolism for even longer than a day. So the thinking that somebody doesn't need calories on a rest day, I think, is just a little bit limited.
Yeah.
The other thing is of why I like these kind of consistent targets is I find that most people sort of have a usual volume. It doesn't mean that every single day is the same, but across a week they have a usual volume, which I think Kat falls into. And so this just averages out to a certain number of calories per day that, some days maybe you burn a little bit more, and some days you burn a little bit less, but let's just pick a number that makes sense that we can just consistently hit across the days. Now, there are some cases where I would potentially start to shift calories around, and this is if we had really a wide variation in volume. Let's say like somebody who most days of the week, they work out for 30 minutes a day. And then on the weekend, I don't know, they live in Boulder, Colorado, so they do their 8-hour mountain bike ride with friends. We are going to have to fuel that 8-hour mountain bike ride a bit different. You just burn through so much more energy that day that if you tried to average out your calories needed across the week in that scenario, you're going to be so hungry on every single day because just one day is this outlier event. So the truth is there is some variation in hunger based on volume, but I wouldn't do that if most days look the same. Like she has enough volume across most of her days that I think an average intake is going to be what she wants to do. And in this case, again, I go back really, I think the answer for Kat might be that she might just need more fuel as her baseline. And that really is potentially going to affect the hunger swings on those rest days. Yeah.
Got it. All right. Last question we've got is from Amy. She asks, from bodybuilding years, I'd always heard casein. Is that how you pronounce it? Casein? Casein? Casein protein is your quote unquote sleepy protein, meaning it's best utilized, consumed at night before bed. Valid or urban legend? I've not yet combusted from having it during the day, but wondering if this could be a good alternative since I don't tolerate whey or vegan protein well, but I like a smoothie in emergency situations. I'm glad you haven't combusted yet.
Yeah, so there's this kind of frequent online discussion around casein as a slow release protein versus whey, which is always known as fast acting. And basically the difference is in this chemical structure between the two makes casein just stay in the stomach a bit longer with a more moderate release, almost kind of what we were talking about with UCAN, but now here with protein. But it has a more moderate release to the small intestine where the amino acids would be absorbed, where whey just moves on to the small intestine more quickly, and therefore it's considered fast acting. So a lot of the studies that kind of promote this type of thinking are looking at MPS, which we've talked about before, muscle protein synthesis. And this is what's needed to rebuild new muscle. The question is, whenever we hear, okay, there's increased muscle protein synthesis, our mind wants to jump to the idea that means I have new muscle mass, but that's not a foolproof conclusion. We actually have to know, did that increase in MPS result in long-term increases in muscle mass? And that's where the answer is no. When we look at studies that look at muscle mass increase, it doesn't seem to matter much when you have protein, casein, or whey, so long as you have enough. So long as you have enough total quantity, i.e. the 0.7 grams per pound or higher if you want to. Now, if somebody is already at that higher level, this 1 gram per pound, so over my typical 0.7 baseline, and let's also say they're a professional level athlete, and they're trying to, at their high level, still make muscle mass gains. Okay, well then sure, there's no harm in trying things like having casein before bed to see if potential increases in MPS also result in increase in muscle mass for them. But it's more like we're kind of trying out a theoretical maybe than we're betting on where we actually have evidence that it's necessary and working, right? So doing stuff like I'm going to space out my protein perfectly, or I'm going to have this type of protein before bed, it certainly doesn't harm the person. But again, consistency in your intake and how much total intake are going to be the most important things that you need to get in your diet right before, possibly doesn't even matter before worrying about the timing of protein. Again, it's for people that already are very dialed at a professional level that want to try to see if they maybe get a 1% return on investment, not for people that are trying to just make initial good gains that I think describe 99% of my clients.
All right. So what I've learned today is that when it comes to nutrition for fitness, the only thing that really matters is what we talk about all the time, which is the right amount, taken consistently, with as few shiny objects as possible. Yes, it does tend to come back to some of those basics. Well, it's called the Consistency Project. Yeah, that's right. We call it that for a reason. All right, my friend.
We can't be like, today's the Inconsistency Project.
All right. Thank you everybody out there for listening. Thank you for sending in your questions. Again, just respond to any one of EC's emails to get a question in the queue. To get on that list, optimizemenutrition/email, correct?
.com/email, yep.
Amazing. Cool. All right. EC and I will be back next week for another episode of the Consistency Project.